It was late evening when Emma first heard the tale of the mysterious forest. The sun had long since dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the village, and the scent of fresh pine and smoke from hearth fires filled the crisp autumn air. Emma sat at the wooden table inside the small, cozy cottage, staring intently at the old man across from her. His wrinkled hands wrapped around a cup of tea. His eyes gleamed in the flickering light of the fire. As he spoke, his voice low and full of warning. "They say no one comes back from the mysterious forest," the old man, named Elias, began, his tone slow and deliberate. "People who have ventured there, they disappear without a trace. Some say it's cursed, others that it's haunted by ancient spirits. Whatever the truth may be, the forest is not for the living." Emma, a university student, visiting the small village for the first time, was instantly captivated by the story. She had come here to escape the pressures of city life, to find some peace and solitude in nature. But now her curiosity was piqued. "But has anyone ever survived?" Emma asked, leaning forward. "Surely there must be someone who knows what happens inside the forest." Elias shook his head solemnly, his long grey beard shifting slightly. As he spoke, "There are legends. Of course, stories passed down through generations. But the truth is, the deeper you go, the less likely you are to return. The forest has a life of its own, a way of drawing people in and never letting them go." Emma shivered, though she wasn't sure if it was from the cold or the eerie tone of Elias' words. She glanced out the window, where the dark silhouette of the forest loomed in the distance, the tops of the trees swaying gently in the night breeze. "You're young," Elias continued, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You should stay away from such places. The curiosity of youth has led many to their doom." Despite the warning, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story, something deeper, something that no one had yet uncovered. She had always been drawn to mystery, to the unknown, and this forest, with its dark and foreboding reputation, called to her in a way she couldn't explain. That night, as she lay in the small bed in the cottage's guest room, Emma found herself unable to sleep. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the forest, to the tales of the lost souls who had ventured too deep. Was it truly cursed, or was there something else hidden within its depths, something ancient and forgotten? By morning, Emma had made up her mind. She would explore the forest herself. The next day, with the morning sun casting a pale light over the village, Emma prepared for her journey. She packed her small backpack with essentials: water, snacks, a flashlight, and a notebook for jotting down her thoughts. She didn't tell anyone about her plan, not even Elias, who would undoubtedly try to stop her. The village was peaceful. As she walked through the narrow streets, the houses with their thatched roofs bathed in the soft glow of morning light. But beyond the edge of the village, where the forest began, the atmosphere changed. The trees were taller here, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands, casting long shadows over the dirt path that led into the heart of the woods. Emma hesitated at the entrance, a knot forming in her stomach. The warnings from the night before echoed in her mind, but she pushed them aside. She had come here for an adventure, and she wasn't about to turn back now. She took a deep breath and stepped into the forest. At first, the path was clear, the underbrush well trodden by the occasional hiker or hunter. The air was cooler here. The canopy of trees blocking out much of the sunlight. But as she ventured deeper, the path began to narrow, and the forest grew denser. The trees seemed to close in around her, their thick trunks covered in moss and vines. It was as if the forest itself was trying to keep her from going any further. Emma's heart pounded in her chest, but she pressed on. She had read enough about ancient myths and folklore to know that every story had a kernel of truth. If she could just go far enough, maybe she would discover the secret of the mysterious forest. The deeper she went, the quieter it became. The sounds of the village faded away, replaced by the soft rustling of leaves and the occasional chirp of a bird. But even the birds seemed wary, their calls distant and few. After what felt like hours of walking, Emma came to a small clearing. In the center of the clearing was a large stone covered in strange symbols that she didn't recognize. The stone was smooth and polished, standing upright like a marker of some sort. Emma approached the stone, her eyes narrowing as she examined the symbols. They were intricate and ancient, unlike anything she had ever seen before. She reached out to touch the stone, her fingers grazing the cool surface. The moment her hand made contact, the ground beneath her feet began to tremble. A low, rumbling sound echoed through the forest, and Emma stumbled back in shock. The stone seemed to pulse with energy, the symbols glowing faintly in the dim light. Fear gripped her heart, and she turned to leave the clearing. But as she took her first step, she realized that the path she had come down was no longer there. The trees had shifted, closing off her escape route. Panic set in. Emma spun around, searching for another way out. But the forest had changed. The once familiar trees were now twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching out like claws. She was trapped. As Emma stood frozen in the clearing, her mind racing with fear and confusion, then she heard a sound behind her, the soft crunch of footsteps on the forest floor. She whirled around, her heart leaping into her throat. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, partially obscured by the shadows of the trees. It was a man, tall and lean, his face hidden beneath the hood of a long, dark cloak. "Who are you?" Emma demanded, her voice trembling. "How did you find me?" The man stepped forward, his movements slow and deliberate. As he came closer, Emma could see his face, sharp features, with deep-set eyes that gleamed with an unsettling intensity. "I am one who knows the forest," the man said, his voice low and smooth. "And it seems you have ventured where you should not." Emma's heart raced. "I didn't mean to. I just wanted to explore, to understand the stories." The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Curiosity is dangerous in a place like this. The forest does not take kindly to intruders." Emma took a step back, her pulse quickening. "What do you mean? What's happening? Why can't I find the way back?" The man's expression darkened. "The forest has chosen you. You are no longer a visitor. You are part of it now." Before Emma could respond, the ground beneath her feet trembled again. The trees around them seemed to sway, their branches creaking and groaning, as if alive. The man's gaze flicked to the stone in the center of the clearing, and his eyes narrowed. "You have touched the stone." Emma's breath caught in her throat. "Yes, but I didn't know." The man's face grew serious. "That stone is not meant to be touched. It is a marker, a gateway to something far older and darker than you can imagine." Emma's stomach churned with fear. What of Idone, The monster stepped closer, his eyes locking onto hers. "You have awakened the forest." Before Emma could fully grasp the gravity of the man's words, the ground beneath her feet gave a violent shudder, knocking her off balance. She stumbled backward, her heart pounding in her chest, as the trees around her began to move, not swaying in the wind, but shifting, twisting unnaturally, as if they were alive. The man's eyes widened, and for the first time, Emma saw fear in his gaze. He grabbed her arm, pulling her to her feet. With surprising strength, "Run," he shouted. Without a second thought, Emma bolted from the clearing. The man closed behind her. The forest seemed to come alive. Around them, the branches of the trees, reaching out like skeletal fingers, trying to ensnare them. The path twisted and turned, but every time Emma tried to follow it, it shifted, leading her deeper into the heart of the woods. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her legs burning from the effort. She had no idea where they were going, but the man urged her forward, his hand gripping her wrist tightly. As they weaved through the forest, behind them, a low, guttural growl echoed through the trees, a sound that sent chills down Emma's spine. "What was that?" Emma gasped, her eyes wide with terror. The man didn't answer. His face was grim, his jaw set. As they ran faster, the growling growing louder with every passing second. Just when Emma thought she couldn't run any further, the trees parted, and they burst into another clearing. This one was larger than the last, with a small stream running through the center, its water shimmering in the dim light. "Here," the man said, releasing her wrist and motioning for her to follow him to the edge of the stream. "We can hide here." Emma collapsed to the ground, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. Her mind raced, filled with questions. But before she could voice any of them, the growling returned, louder, closer. She looked up, her heart freezing in her chest, as she saw the creature emerge from the trees. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. Tall, with twisted, gnarled limbs and glowing red eyes. Its body was covered in dark, matted fur, and its mouth was filled with sharp, jagged teeth. It moved with a predator's grace, its gaze locked onto Emma and the man. "What is that?" Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. The man didn't respond. Instead, he grabbed a handful of leaves from the ground and scattered them in the air, muttering something under his breath. The leaves swirled around them, forming a protective barrier as the creature advanced. For a moment, it seemed to hesitate, its glowing eyes narrowing as it sniffed the air. Then, with a snarl, it lunged forward, its massive claws outstretched. Emma screamed, her body frozen with fear. But just as the creature reached them, the leaves flared to life, glowing with a brilliant light that blinded her for a moment. The creature howled in pain, its body writhing as the light enveloped it. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the creature vanished, dissolving into the air like smoke. Emma's heart still raced, her body trembling with adrenaline. After the terrifying encounter, she couldn't tear her eyes away from the spot where the creature had been just moments before. Its eerie howl still echoed in her ears, sending shivers down her spine. What was that?" Emma stammered, turning to the man, her voice barely above a whisper. The man wiped sweat from his brow, his dark cloak swaying with his heavy breathing. He began to talk. "That was one of the forest's guardians, a being summoned to punish those who trespass. It has been awakened by your touch of the stone." Emma's mind reeled. She had heard of haunted places, of cursed lands, but this felt too real, too immediate. Her thoughts swirled as she struggled to make sense of what had just happened. "I didn't know," she whispered, shaking her head. "I didn't know that touching the stone would do anything." The man's gaze softened for a moment, though his face remained shadowed by his hood. Most who enter these woods never understand what they have done until it is too late. But you may still have a chance. "A chance?" Emma asked, her pulse quickening. "A chance for what?" The man paused, his eyes dark and unreadable. "To escape." Escape. The word clung to her like a lifeline in the midst of chaos. Her mind whirred with possibilities, but the fear that gripped her wouldn't let go. Could she really escape this cursed forest? Could she outrun the nightmares that seemed to dwell within it? How? Emma asked, desperation creeping into her voice. The man turned away from her and began walking towards the edge of the clearing. His steps were deliberate, like someone who knew the forest intimately, someone who had walked these twisted paths before. He paused at the edge of the stream, his voice cold and distant. "There is an ancient ritual," he said, "a way to appease the forest spirits and break free from the curse." Emma's mind raced as she followed him, the leaves crunching underfoot. "What kind of ritual?" she asked, feeling the weight of dread settle in her chest. He hesitated before responding, his tone dark. "One that comes with a price. Nothing is given freely in this forest. If you wish to leave, you will need to offer something in return." Emma swallowed hard, her throat dry. "What do I have to offer?" The man turned to face her, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her blood run cold. "The forest feeds on fear and loss. It demands sacrifice. But you," he paused, studying her closely, "you may be able to outsmart it." As they walked deeper into the forest, the air grew colder, and the trees seemed to close in around them. The sunlight barely pierced the thick canopy, casting long, eerie shadows across the ground. Emma's legs raking, her heart still pounding, but she pushed herself forward, determined to find a way out. The man led her to another clearing, this one smaller and more secluded. In the center stood a circle of stones, each one engraved with ancient runes. The air here felt heavy, almost suffocating, as if the forest itself was watching their every move. "This is the place," the man said, his voice barely audible. "The ritual must be performed here." Emma's heart raced as she looked around the clearing, her mind spinning with questions. "What do I have to do?" The monk crouched beside one of the stones and began tracing the runes with his fingers. "The ritual requires 3 offerings," he said slowly, as if choosing his words carefully. "The first is something that belongs to you, an object of personal significance. The second is a memory, one that you hold dear. And the third," he paused, his eyes meeting hers, "the third is your fear. You must face it, confront it, and let the forest consume it." Emma felt her chest tighten. An object, a memory, and her fear. The forest demanded a piece of her, something intimate, something she wasn't sure she could give. But what choice did she have? "What happens if I fail?" Emma asked, her voice barely a whisper. The man's expression darkened. "If you fail, the forest will claim you. You will become one of its lost souls, trapped here forever." Emma's stomach churned with dread, but she knew she had to try. She couldn't let herself be swallowed by the darkness of the forest. She couldn't become another one of its victims. With trembling hands, Emma reached into her backpack and pulled out a small necklace, one her mother had given her when she was a child. It was a simple pendant, but it held immense sentimental value. She hesitated for a moment, feeling a pang of loss as she placed it in the center of the stone circle. Next, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She thought back to a memory from her childhood, a summer day when she and her father had gone to the beach. She could still remember the feel of the warm sand between her toes, the sound of the waves crashing against the shore, and the laughter they had shared. She held the memory in her mind for a moment before releasing it, feeling a strange sense of emptiness as it slipped away. And now her fear. The man stepped closer, his gaze intense. "You must confront your deepest fear," he said. "The forest feeds on it, only by facing it head-on. Can you break free?" Emma's heart pounded as she tried to focus. Her deepest fear, what was it? The answer came to her slowly, creeping up from the darkest corners of her mind. Loneliness. She had always feared being alone, truly alone, the kind of loneliness that left you feeling hollow, as if the world had forgotten you existed. The fear of disappearing, without anyone noticing, without anyone caring. Tears welled up in her eyes as she let the fear wash over her. The forest seemed to pulse with energy, the air growing thick with tension. And then, the ground beneath her feet began to tremble. Suddenly, the trees around the clearing began to shake violently, their branches creaking and groaning. As if alive, the wind howled through the forest, carrying with it a chilling whisper, an ancient, malevolent voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You dare to challenge me?" the voice hissed, sending shivers down Emma's spine. The man stood beside her, his expression grim. "The forest is angry. It knows. You're trying to break free." Emma's heart raced as she watched the trees twist and contort, their bark splitting open to reveal gaping maws of darkness. The forest was alive, truly alive. And it was furious. "Stay close," the man said, his voice tense. "The ritual isn't over yet." Emma nodded, her hands trembling as she braced herself for what was to come. The ground shook beneath her feet, and the shadows around them seemed to grow thicker, darker. The air was suffocating, filled with the scent of damp earth and decay. And then, from the darkness, the creature emerged again. It was even more terrifying than before, its glowing red eyes fixed on Emma, its jagged teeth bared in a snarl. The creature let out a deafening roar, shaking the very ground beneath them. As it charged forward, Emma froze, fear paralyzing her, as the creature closed in. But before it could reach her, the man stepped forward, raising his hand. "Not yet," he muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible over the creature's growls. He threw something into the air, a handful of dark powder that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. As the powder spread out, the creature hesitated, snarling in frustration. "It's not enough," the man said, his voice tight with tension. "You must give the forest more. You must confront your fear fully." Emma's heart pounded in her chest. She had already offered the necklace and the memory. What more could she give? But then it hit her. Her fear wasn't just about being alone. It was about being forgotten, about vanishing without a trace, without anyone remembering who she was. She took a deep breath, tears streaming down her face as she faced the creature. "I am not afraid anymore," she whispered, her voice trembling but steady. "I won't let you take me." The creature let out a furious howl. But as Emma stood her ground, something strange happened. The shadows around her began to shift. Swirling like smoke, the creature hesitated, its glowing eyes flickering as if uncertain. And then, with a final, deafening roar, it vanished, dissolving into the darkness, like a wisp of smoke. The ground beneath Emma's feet stopped trembling, and the air around her grew still. The forest was silent once more. The man stood beside her, his expression unreadable, as he watched the creature disappear into the darkness. "It is over," he said softly. Emma could hardly believe it. She had faced her fear, confronted the forest's wrath, and somehow, miraculously, she had survived. But the forest was still watching, still waiting. The man turned to her, his eyes dark and serious. "The ritual is complete. You have made your offering, and the forest has accepted it. But now, you must leave, before it changes its mind." Emma nodded, her legs trembling, as she took a step forward. The man led her back through the trees, his steps swift and sure. The forest felt different now, quieter, less oppressive, but the sense of danger still lingered in the air. They walked in silence, the only sound the crunch of leaves beneath their feet. Emma's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, of fear, of relief, of everything she had just experienced. Finally, after what felt like hours, they reached the edge of the forest. The sunlight filtered through the trees, casting a warm, golden glow over the landscape. Emma could see the road in the distance, the same road she had taken into the forest, what felt like a lifetime ago. "You are free," the man said, his voice quiet. Emma turned to him, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't even know your name." The man's lips curved into a small, sad smile. "Names don't matter in this forest. But if you ever return, remember the price you paid." With that, he turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving Emma standing at the edge of the forest, the sunlight warming her skin. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding. As she stepped out of the forest and onto the road, the world outside seemed brighter, more vivid, alive in a way it hadn't before. But as she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was still watching, still waiting. She had escaped, but the forest's grip on her wasn't entirely gone. And deep down, she knew that someday, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next year, but someday, she would be drawn back to the forest. Because once you have entered the mysterious forest, you are never truly free. As Emma made her way back to her car, the events of the day played over and over. In her mind, the eerie stillness of the forest, the terrifying creature, the ritual that had nearly cost her everything. It all felt like a twisted nightmare, but the dirt on her hands, the scratches on her arms, and the emptiness, where her necklace had been told her, it had been real. She drove in silence, the trees on either side of the road blurring, as she sped away from the forest. But no matter how far she went, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed inside her, that a part of the forest had followed her. When she finally reached home, the familiar comfort of her apartment felt distant. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the floor, trying to process everything that had happened. The man in the forest had saved her, but his warning echoed in her mind. The forest would never truly let her go. Weeks passed, but the memories of the mysterious forest stayed with Emma. The shadows in her apartment seemed darker than before, the wind outside her window more haunting. She found herself glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see the creature lurking in the corners of her vision. But it wasn't just the fear that lingered. There was something else. An unsettling curiosity. A strange pull that tugged at her. Whenever she thought about the forest, it was as if the forest had left its mark on her. A part of her forever tied to its mysteries. And as the days turned into weeks, Emma couldn't help but wonder if, one day, she would return to the mysterious forest, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Far away, deep within the heart of the forest, the trees whispered and swayed, the shadows danced in the moonlight, and the ancient stones in the clearing pulsed with a quiet, eerie energy. The forest was patient. It always waited, and it always remembered those who dared to challenge its darkness. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Please share this video with your friends and family too. Thanks.